What's going on, everyone? So there's been a lot of buzz about Paul George potentially going to the Philadelphia 76ers this upcoming offseason. I mean, even Joel Embiid is out and openly just recruiting Paul George. I mean, he is literally at the NBA Finals at halftime, sitting right next to Paul George, talking about and like hinting and winking and nodding his head towards Paul George as he's talking about, bringing in help and restructuring this roster. And look, Paul George does make a lot of sense for Philly, and Philly makes a lot of sense for Paul George, right? He gets to go to a situation to where one is in the Eastern Conference, which is very weak, and him, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid would be a very formidable trio. Now, there's obviously some concerns, right? Particularly health, but even health-wise, right? Paul George can tend to disappear at times in the playoffs, although he's had great series. When he was in Indiana, the guy looked like a bona fide number one, right? And if it wasn't for Miami, very possible that him and his Indiana teams may have won a championship, right? Or at least been in the NBA Finals. But gets to go to a weaker East, right? And also, he'd have basically be technically the third guy. But he's also a guy that fits and is very complement, right? Like, he's not a guy that needs the ball heavily or is going to be overly bearing and demanding, right? To me, Paul George, he's a guy that's not going to take away from a Joel Embiid. He's not going to take away from a Tyrese Maxey. He's a guy that I think would complement them very nicely, also defend the best player on the other team, but he's also a guy that can just take over and go off at any moment or whenever you need him to. Right? It's like, hey, you guys handle most of the load. Like, I'll take care of the rest. Don't worry. Take a back seat. And when he's on, he's up there with the best of them in the league. Right? Like, Paul George is still one of the best two-way guys in the league. He might still be one of the best, like, two-way guys. Like, legit two-way guys. Because most of the top stars, most of the top guys aren't very good on the defense side. They're real excellent offensive players, but they're not very good defensively. As far as, like, a 3-and-D wing goes, not very many that are better than Paul George. And he's a guy that can play the 2, 3, or 4. That goes a long way and a lot of value in and of itself also. But he's also one of the best difficulty shot makers in the league. And that has a lot of value, right? Because he's a guy that has excellent over-the-top shooting and can just hit some tough, challenging shots, especially when you get to the playoffs and stuff like that. So I do think Paul George can go a long way. However, Paul George recently had some interesting things to say on his podcast that kind of sounded like it was towards Philadelphia and in particular Daryl Morey. So here's some of the things that we're saying, right? So James Harden and Daryl Morey's falling out could affect the 76ers' potential pursuit of Paul George. So Paul George, believe it or not, players talk. And then reputations go around like, hey man, I don't know about going to this place because they watch your back. You know what I mean. That's the conversations you have. He also talked about what he's looking for in free agency, right? And he said, it's not even about chasing a championship, but it's playing the right style of basketball is what I'm chasing. So again, Paul George said some very interesting things. And guess who's his teammate? Or was his teammate, right? James Harden. So for those that don't know, James Harden and Daryl Morey had a very public, very kind of just wild and toxic falling out. Now, a lot of it was kind of on James Harden's side of things, but he felt very spited. He felt that Daryl Morey lied to him. Now, I personally, and I covered it, I'm not going to go too much into it, right? You want to see some of the videos and some of the more details if you're somebody that's not familiar with the situation, go check out some of those videos. But I think James Harden was being a little dramatic, right? It basically stemmed, when you boil it down, it basically boiled down to that he believed he was going to basically get a specific signing, and the problem was it would have been tampering at the time, and the Sixers had already been fined for tampering, and they couldn't risk it again. And so there was just this whole thing going on behind the scenes. But guess what? Players talk. And the guy that you want to get is teammates or was teammates this past year with the guy that you spited, right? And Daryl Morey has this reputation for being a liar. Daryl Morey has this reputation for basically not being upfront and honest, telling you one thing and doing the other, right? And James Harden was like his number one guy, right? Like James Harden and Daryl Morey were like two peas in a pod. And Daryl Morey slighted James Harden, or James Harden felt like he was slighted. I'm not saying James Harden wasn't valid in the way that he felt about the situation. I just think he was being a little over the top and dramatic. And if you saw the whole sequence, I mean, he went on like a press tour. Like literally went on a press tour and talked about Daryl Morey and all this stuff. To me, it was just kind of like, like, okay, dude, like sometimes you need to keep the antics out of it. Like just, you're not happy with Daryl Morey, fine. Right? I think the reason that you're upset, I get why you're upset, but you're not looking at the entirety of things. And the way James Harden was looking at it is like, why do I care? You told me one thing and you're doing the other, right? And Daryl Morey was like, I'm going to do it. I just can't do it right now. Like, I can't do what you want at the moment, right? And he ends up getting spited. He says that he's going to trade him. He doesn't get traded, or James Harden didn't get traded exactly when he wanted to be traded. So then he felt like, okay, I'm going to force my way out, right? And Daryl Morey was going to trade him. He was just trying to get the best return and package possible to help the Sixers. But James Harden, he wanted out when he wanted to get out. So they had this huge, big public falling out. It was a mess, right? So now, I'm sure James Harden is aware that Paul George is probably considering the Sixers and is probably, had those talks like, hey, what was the deal, right? And I'm sure James Harden relayed to Paul George. That to me, it sounds like, going off of what Paul George said, that sounded like a conversation he had with James Harden, right? Like, that might not be a place you want to go because Daryl Morey is not somebody that is respectable. He's not on the up and up, right? And if you do want to go, hey, best of luck to you, but that just watch yourself, be careful type thing. A guy helping your buddy, right? Like if you knew that this guy over here is shady and your friend's going to go do business with him or something, you're going to be like, hey man, hey, this guy rips people off. Hey, this guy is known to lie when it comes to his business deals. Might not be the best place to go do business. But hey, if you think it's a good deal and you want to go and do business with that guy, just be careful. Take care of yourself. Watch yourself. Right? That's what that sounded like to me. And, the Sixers had to have been prepared for this. The Sixers have to know that, like, hey, man, James Harden, he's a disgruntled ex-employee, right? Like, they had a very public falling out. Like, it wasn't something that happened behind closed doors, right? Like, it wasn't this display that was just like, oh, hey, that's odd. Like, why would Paul George say that? No, as soon as he said that, everyone was like, oh, that's James Harden telling Paul George about the Sixers, right? Because it was so public, open, and in your face. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because, look, again, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid would be, it's tough. It's tough. Obviously, you still got to round out a competitive roster around them and add some depth and some overall talent. But, I mean, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and Joel Embiid, I think would be an excellent complement, right? I think they'd be one of the better trios in the league. I think they, at worst, are probably top 2 or 3 in the Eastern. I mean, the Celtics are still pretty deep, pretty tough. But beyond the Celtics, I mean, you got like the Knicks. I'm not really sold on the Bucks, if I'm being honest. But they do have Dame and Giannis, so you got to at least have them in the conversation. Cavs, again, I'm not really big on them. Like, I think Philly is probably the second, maybe third best team. Again, obviously, it depends on what the rest of the depth looks like. Guys got to stay healthy and stuff. But assuming that they can round out the roster nicely and Joel Embiid and Paul George can play enough games, I think that they'll be a top 2 or 3 seed in the Eastern Conference, and I think that they very well could come out of the East. I don't think it would be really surprising to anybody if that were to happen. But Paul George has a lot to think about, and it'd be kind of crazy if the whole Daryl Morey James Harden debacle basically kept Paul George from going to the Sixers. It's like, not only did you lose James Harden, but you lost Paul George. I know you can't really lose what you don't have, but if you could have had him, had the whole James Harden thing not fallen out, that could be a big blow. But anyway, as always, this is a discussion. I pass a question on you. Let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. What do you think? How do you feel? What are your thoughts? Do you think Paul George still goes to the Sixers? Do you think, no, he stays with the Clippers? Do you think that, the James Harden situation, it shouldn't be a factor? Again, how do you feel? Whatever your thoughts are, I'd love to hear it. So let me know down in the comments below. That being said, if you haven't liked this video, hit that like button. Helps me a lot. So we enjoy these types of videos, and I truly appreciate it. Not subscribe to the channel, hit that subscribe button. Turn on the bell notifications. Appreciate y'all. See you in the next one. Thank you.